public to speak from Ealing Voice. You have 5 minutes to speak. Can I remind members of the committee that the report is focused on the Victoria Hall Trust and its property assets within the Victoria Hall Trust, and not a decision about the wider scheme for the disposal of Ealing Town Hall. That decision was taken by the Council in October 2014, with a further decision to appoint Mastcraft as preferred developer for Ealing Town Hall, which was taken in July 2016. Members will recall that on 19th December 2017, Full Council, as the trustee for the Victoria Hall Trust, delegated the Council's function as trustee to the General Purpose Committee. So for this item, members are taking positions as trustees of the Victoria Hall Trust. The report tonight is an update on the Victoria Hall Trust generally, recognizing that the trust has not met formally for many years. As far as I can understand it, the trust last time in the 70s, when there has been little activity since 1975. The Council is now seeking to redress that issue. The report will also update members about the result of 2 consultations about Victoria Hall. One about proposal to change the objects of the trust, which took place from 3rd November 2017 to 9th February 2018. And the second about the proposed leasing of Ealing Town Hall, which of course includes the Victoria Hall to Mastcraft Limited, which took place from 2nd February 2018 to 2nd March 2018. Both consultations have now ended, and officers have collated responses from both consultations. Now I will invite Councillor Bell to say a few words. Then I will ask David Moore, the Ealing Director of Regional Residential Planning, to take through the report.
Thank you, Chair. And I think it's important that as portfolio holder I address the committee. I was part of, obviously, Full Council's decision to delegate this decision to the General Purposes Committee, and it's good to see that the General Purposes Committee has a meaty decision to make. And it's also, I think, really important to understand the context of your decisions that you're going to make tonight. You're effectively, as the Chair's already said, acting as the trustees of the Trust for Victoria Hall. The context of it was the original decision by Cabinet, which was to look to secure the Town Hall's future as the kind of civic heart of the borough. And the Victoria Hall was all part of that Cabinet decision. And in fact, I remember sitting in this exact spot when it got called in, and we talked about at length in the scrutiny meeting the Trust and the objects of the Trust and what they were and how they related to the Cabinet decision. Now, what I would say to you is that the decision that you're being asked to take tonight and the Trust's objects are in line with what we have done in making our decision as a Cabinet. We did, as I say, the purpose of the whole project is to secure the Victoria Hall for its original purposes and also to address some of the financial challenges that the Council faces. And obviously you've been recommended that you're going to have more detail on the finances and the accounts of the Trust going forward, so that you'll be able to see with greater clarity separated out from the overall costs of the town, or what the costs of the Victoria Hall are, and that will come back to you. But what I would say is that you know, we are looking for community access to Victoria Hall in the same way that we currently operate, in that there will be a discount, community discount, that will be written into the lease in any negotiations that go forward with Mastcraft. It's already part of the Cabinet decision. But we were very, very clear about that as politicians, and I wanted to come tonight to make it absolutely clear that this has got political commitment from us as an administration. It's important. We think this is the best way forward for Victoria Hall and for the overall project as a whole. And so it's essential, I think, that we build into any of those agreements with Mastcraft around Victoria Hall that we have those free uses as the council each year, and that there are also clearly written into any agreement those community discounts that are available now. Now there will be a 10% uplift or thereabouts in terms of those community rates. That's no different to what we did when we put the investment into Greenford Hall. It was expected that when you have a new building that's reinvested in and is of a better quality, that there will be some uplift in price. And we've never hidden that, we've never said that that's not the case, but and that's what happened at Greenford Hall. But nevertheless, we will hardwire into those agreements with Mastcraft those discounted rates for people who want to use Victoria Hall for community purposes. Obviously, there will also be commercial lets of Victoria Hall. That was part of the reason why scrutiny actually agreed pretty much unanimously that putting a hotel in the town hall was a good idea because of the synergies between the registrar's office and the weddings that take place, the wedding receptions that happen in Victoria Hall, and now you have the third part of that triumvirate of a hotel for people to stay at for weddings. So it was unanimously kind of supported by scrutiny, and I don't think anything's changed. Now, we've got into some complexity tonight, and I'm sure David will give you some more additional complexity when he speaks in a minute, but the overall thrust of this is that we are keeping the original aspirations of our Victorian forefathers to have the Victoria Hall as an asset for the community and as a place where the community can come and meet and enjoy and learn and socialise and do whatever. We don't call them bazaars anymore, but you know, that's what the original purpose of the Victoria Hall. I don't believe anything that we've decided as a cabinet or that you decide in terms of your job tonight as trustees will take away from any of those original objects of the trust. So I'll leave it to that and hand over to David.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Thank you. Does that work? Can you hear me at the back?
No.
If I don't use the mic?
No. No.
Yes. Okay, split vote. I'll try and use this. Okay. So what I want to do before I talk, sorry, by way of introduction, I'm David Moore, I'm the Interim Director for Region and Planning for the Council. And what I wanted to do was to just talk you through the report, but just before we do that, I just wanted to share with you a draft image. Apologise that you may not be able to see it in too much detail, but we can put it up afterwards. It's an image from Mastcraft, and this is a draft image. This is still subject to planning, so it may well change. But it's the image developed so far by Mastcraft explaining their proposed use for Victoria Hall, and for Ealing Town Hall, beg your pardon. What you might see here is that Victoria Hall is still very much part of the design. They're assuming that they will put in the middle part of Ealing Town Hall, the hotel element. So the two wings of the, well, in fact the front is respected and retained. So in terms of, it's been discussed with Historic England. Historic England are very happy with the proposals now. We've been through a number of discussions and iterations with Historic England, and they're happy that the view, certainly from the street level, of Ealing Town Hall will be retained. From the street, you might just catch a glimpse of some of that top part of the hotel, but I've seen the images and things, and it does look to be very, very minimal. So Historic England are very comfortable with the impact of the design. So the hotel element going right at the back of Ealing Town Hall. You can see the point of this image is to really explain to this meeting that Victoria Hall Trust will be retained and refurbished. There is a cafe that they're proposing that will go down here, and the roof terrace that will go out on looking out over Uxbridge Road. Again, they are draft proposals. It's not the final version, but it's to try and explain to members of this committee that, as the leader has said, what we're trying to do is protect the community use of Victoria Hall. And the proposals that we've got from Mastcraft are doing just that. The leader mentioned wedding and events and things. I think it'd be really interesting, as we go forward, if there is a wedding, you can imagine that people could use the Victoria Hall for a wedding, guests can stay in the hotel, they can use the facilities, the restaurants, all of the other facilities that come into the hotel, perhaps watch a wedding party, arrive from the roof garden terrace and watch it coming up the street. And so, in terms of improving the offer for the residents, I would hope that this would be an improved offer for the residents, in that there will be cafes, restaurants, a whole range of new and additional facilities for the residents of the borough. That's not supposed to be a sales pitch, that's not the purpose of tonight's meeting. I really just wanted to demonstrate that Victoria Hall is still part of the considerations, and it will be refurbished as part of the process. So, the leader mentioned that there may well be an increase in costs. That's the 10% increase. But as the leader explained, I think if anyone were to refurbish the cost, if the council were still to own the building, and we put the money into refurbishing the building, then we also would, I expect, be looking to get a similar increase in the cost of using the facilities, just to account for the increased refurbishment, the costs of refurbishing the building. And as the leader said, there will be a 60% discounted rate off the commercial, 60% of the commercial rate for at least the 10 years of the lease period. And there's been some uncertainty and some comments in the press or the consultations, but the lease documents talk about at least 10 years of that. The council is also keen to protect the use of the space by the community for the length of the 250-year lease, and perhaps that's something members of the General Purpose Committee might, as trustees, you might want to ask officers to ensure that that's picked up in our negotiations with Mastcraft. So, if I move on to the report. So you'll have seen the report, so as we go forward I'll pick out certain paragraphs. So the first paragraph we're going to pick up was paragraph 2.1, and this is really talking about the background. And in October 2014, as the leaders mentioned, Cabinet decided to prepare a brief and to mark it an opportunity, and the words are to refurbish and to redevelop Ealing Town Hall with a view of safeguarding the future of the building. The report at the time referred to the ongoing costs, the backlog of maintenance, and went through the issues and difficulties that the Town Hall was facing in terms of generating income. But that decision has already been taken, and in July 2016, Council appointed Mastcraft as the preferred developer. It had been through an open procurement process, so developers had been asked if they wanted to submit bids for the building, to develop and refurbish the building. And we went through those that replied and responded, and there's a process of due diligence that was gone through with the parties that submitted tenders to make sure that the bids were appropriate. They were checked out for due diligence by the council's procurement team, by our external advisors, looking at trying to ensure that the companies that came forward had the necessary funding in place and were appropriate bodies to go forward. So the council is currently in negotiations with Mastcraft at the moment, so it is still a current deal. The deal has not been finalised. So I just asked members of the committee to know that there is a commercial sensitivity to some of the discussions. These are ongoing discussions, not completed discussions, so please bear that in mind as we go forward. Okay. So paragraph 2.3 in the report, it's really just explaining some of the history. And forgive me, you may already know this, Victoria Hall was built in 1888, we think. And £5,000 of money was raised by public subscription, and it was part of the wider development to build the public offices and the free library that now form part of what is known as Ealing Town Hall as a whole complex. In 1893, a declaration of trust was made, and that's outlined in your papers in paragraph 2.4. There is, and was, and has been, some uncertainty about the Trust's assets. They are described as the hall and rooms and adjacent toilets, I think, and rooms. There's some various vague definitions of what is described. And I'll come back on to that later because I suggest a definition of what the assets should be. And I think we will agree, again subject to members of the committee, I think we would suggest that that should include the Victoria Hall, the Prince's Room, and I think the toilets attached to it. So I think that would be for members of the committee to agree that that's what we include as assets. Let's say there is uncertainty, but that's where we have the suggestion. During the years, Victoria Hall Trust received an irregular source of income from the hire of halls. And in 1936, the Council and the Victoria Hall Trust agreed that the Council, as trustees, should lease the Victoria Hall to the Mayor and the Corporation for a sum of £250 per annum rental. And we assume that that would then provide a steady source of income for the Victoria Hall Trust rather than relying on the differing levels of income from hire of the rooms. By 1970, the rental had increased to £900 and was applied mainly to the maintenance of the Coronation Cottages, but these were demolished in 1975. So in December 1975, the Council's then General Purposes and Establishment Committee, which is a strong parallel to tonight's committee and the delegation from full Council to this committee. So the Council's General Purposes and Establishment Committee agreed that the value of the rental should be increased to £2,000 per annum and the money should be paid into the Mayor's Christmas Fund. Now, there is a lot of research on going into the records, but it seems that there were no further decisions made by or about Victoria Hall Trust since 1975. So we then enter into a void and an abyss of records about the Trust. So, moving forward, in paragraph 2.10 of the report, to come into slightly more modern times, the future of the Ealing Town Hall as a whole, as the leader mentioned, was discussed by Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and a number of discussions were held about the affordability of the hall, the need to refurbish office space, with a number of options discussed, including developing it into an arts or community centre or a commercial development, but noting in particular the difficulties in developing a significant historical and cultural asset, but also what is a relatively inflexible building. And I think that's been reflected when we went out to tender in the relatively low number of developers that were interested in bidding for the work. In 2014, Council received a paper which outlined concerns at the high costs of maintenance of Ealing Town Hall as a whole, noting that there had been £800,000 spent on maintenance and upgrading the hall between 2010 and 2014. And in addition, further works were also outlined as being needed to upgrade the building. And they were listed in the report, but they include inefficiently used space, corridors, offices, circulation space, ageing boilers and heating systems, poor toilet facilities, poor quality internal paintwork, lack of soundproofing, poor access and wayfinding, as well as large unused kitchens or underused kitchens that were not ideal to support community and commercial events. The paper also referenced a building condition survey undertaken by a company called Press and Starkey in 2007, and that suggested that there was an estimated repair cost of £3.7 million for the maintenance backlog, of which £0.8 million had been spent to date, leaving a balance of £2.9 million outstanding maintenance and repair costs to bring the building into a good state of repair. So, and those were, again, those are historical figures, of course. The costs were dated in 2007. As I say, that is now over a decade old, and further deterioration may have occurred to the building, and the costs are also likely to have increased due to inflation and escalated build costs. I imagine that going forward we may need to revisit those costs and have that valuation updated. But as a very, very rough estimate, you might want to consider that it might be around about £6 million backlog maintenance, just looking at inflation, and just to put a notional figure in your head. As a way forward to safeguard the future of Ealing Town Hall, the Council agreed to run this competitive tendering process to redevelop Ealing Town Hall, but as the leader said, right from the outset in the tendering brief, it was made clear that future agreements will be expected to continue some of the current uses of Victoria Hall and other rooms by the local community. So that was right from the brief when the tendering brief went down. In paragraph 2.11, it goes through, and the Council went through the open procurement process. Developers were invited to bid for the redevelopment and refurbishment of the Town Hall. Due diligence was undertaken on the bidders, including the financial checks, as I mentioned earlier. In July 2016, the Council appointed Mastcraft as the preferred bidder for their proposal to add value to the community through the development of a luxury hotel, in part, and to safeguard the future municipal and community use of the remainder. It's worth noting that of the two final bidders, Mastcraft offered a significantly higher proportion of rooms for community and municipal use than did the other finalists. So, the Council will retain the municipal part of the building under a sublease, and this will include the Council chamber, the marriage rooms, meeting rooms and modest Council offices. Under Mastcraft's current proposals, as you can see, or you saw earlier from the image, Victoria Hall will be retained and refurbished, and future wedding guests or attendees at the event, at weddings or events at Victoria Hall, will be able to stay in a luxury hotel in the same building, benefit from on-site catering, facilities and expertise. And the roof garden and cafe areas we hope would add to the enjoyment of the views over Ealing. As I mentioned, negotiations are ongoing with Mastcraft, but the Council expects that the community use of Victoria Hall and the other rooms in the building will continue to be provided at a discounted rate. We've mentioned already that the prices will be uplifted by 10%, reflecting the costs of refurbishment and redevelopment. And the other point that is being written into the leases is protecting the community use of the rooms at a benchmark cost of 60% of the commercial rate for the rooms. In paragraph 2.12, in July 2016, after the appointment of Mastcraft, the Council also received a request from Ealing Voice to register the Town Hall as an asset of community value. This was done, but during a 6-month period, no bids were received from members of the community to purchase the building. So, moving on in paragraph 2213. After the appointment of Mastcraft, Council went through the due diligence process, and as part of that due diligence process, we uncovered the existence of the Victoria Hall Trust. Council took legal advice from legal experts from Council, and they came up with the view that the objects, or the key guiding principles of the Trust, did not meet up-to-date charitable guidelines and should be amended, and there was concern about some of the wording in the actual documents. The proposed new wording for the objects was suggested by Council and supported by the Charity Commission. And the changes to the objects were called what we call a scheme, and it was the subject of the first consultation that went out to members of the public on the 3rd of November 2017 through to the 9th of February. It was extended a number of times at request from members of the public. And so it took just over 3 months. And the new words of the Trust are actually included in paragraph 216. What we found was that there were a number of responses to the consultation that people clearly misunderstood, or the objective of the consultation was quite narrow, and people clearly felt the need to talk about wider topics such as the disposal of Ealing Town Hall. So what Council did was we decided to run a second parallel consultation, which was specifically about the disposal of Ealing Town Hall, and that took place from the 2nd of February to the 2nd of March this year. What we've agreed to do is we've effectively collated all of the results from both consultations into a single response. The responses are all here. If anybody should wish to go through them, they are there. They will be forwarded, if appropriate, to the Charity Commission. In total, there were 277 responses, including a couple that received after the deadline, but we knew that they were on their way in, so we've agreed to accept those responses. Many people raised more than one point in their response, and these have been recorded. We used a way to chart different points that people have raised in things. And in summary, the paragraph 219 summarises the results. Overall, we had 225 of those 277 responses that objected to the disposal of Ealing Town Hall. 67 objected to the changing of the objects of the Town Hall, of the Victoria Hall Trust. There were 6 responses where local people wanted to join the Trust Board. There were 42 responses that wanted further clarity on the consultation. 11 wanted an extension to the consultation period. 3 people wanted to request for an AVC. ACB, thank you, Asset Committee Bank. Thank you. To be set up and run by a community group. And 20 people raised concerns that trustees, i.e. the councillors, were failing in their fiduciary duty. 8 people raised a concern at the loss of community space, and there were a number of other specific questions that were raised, such as questions about development value, about the trust not being compensated, and there was also a request to run a community asset transfer. So you'll notice that it adds up to considerably more than 277. Anyone's trying to do the quick maths on that. So people have raised more than one response, and we just tried to raise all the points, to capture all the points that were raised. We will send a generic response back to all the respondents, so they do get a response. We have sent one reply back to people acknowledging some of the first responses we received when we were informing people about the second response, the second consultation, and we will continue. We'll send a further response back to people. It will have to be generic just because of the volume of replies. Paragraph 2.20, as trustees of the Victoria Hall Trust, you may be concerned about the comments about failing in the fiduciary duties, and the section 4 of the report does point out the duties under the legal section, so that's where it outlines your duties. I'm sure you're sick of my voice, so I've just got a couple of other points to make. Section 3 and Section 7 of the appendix talk about the finance section, and just very briefly, I'm happy to pick up any as an integral part of Ealing Town Hall, and whilst separate income lines are recorded in the council's current accounts, the costs weren't and have not been disaggregated for the whole of Ealing Town Hall's account codes. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people have asked for information about separate accounts that exist for Victoria Hall Trust. They just don't exist. And you know, we have in the report, we tried to explain in section 7 of the report, in the appendix, we've outlined some of the costs, and what we've done is taken from the council's published and audited accounts. We've stripped out, our finance team has stripped out the income and expenditure accounts for Ealing Town Hall, and so it covers the period 2012-13 to 2016-17, which is effectively the last 5 full years. And we're able to strip out and to show that the income that Victoria Hall receives and Princess Hall receive is £257,000 per annum. That's an average over a 5-year period, so that's the 5-year average. And then what we've, there is other income that the Ealing Town Hall receives to the value of £331,000. So the hall as a whole generates, Ealing Town Hall generates £588,000 average income. What we'd also suggest to members of the committee that you recognise that the Victoria Hall Trust assets, the space that's occupied by Victoria Hall, Prince's Hall and the toilets, which you were suggesting to members is the effectively the Trust's property, is very roughly 20% of the space that's within Ealing Town Hall. And so we're suggesting that that's a notional figure that gives you, as we go forward and try and look at the what the costs attributable to Victoria Hall could be, we're trying to use that 20% as a rough figure. So if you look at the income that's been received by the town, by the Victoria Hall and Prince's Hall, it's £257,000. The costs for the whole of Ealing Town Hall are just over £1 million. So 20% of £1 million, if you proportion the costs based on the amount of space, is £200,000. So you've got £257,000 notional income, £200,000 notional costs. But that does ignore the economies of scale, and Appendix 7 points out that there are economies of scale that the council can provide through insurance, security, staffing, etc. And the figure also takes no account of the maintenance backlog that we've mentioned previously. And in the report it does point out in the section 7, points out that there are some significant interest costs as well as repaying the actual principal sum. So again, I won't go into how much that would be, but the report there suggests that there might be at least £50,000 worth of interest charges, and of course it depends at what rate the maintenance backlog is repaid. You'll remember that we were talking about £2.9 million outstanding maintenance backlog at 2007 prices. So there is a significant chunk of money that would be needed to account for that work that is needed. So finally, let me also refer you into paragraph 4.9, members. It talks about accountability in the paper, and I think it's an important point to note that the council does recognise that the minutes and accounts for the Victoria Hall Trust have not been produced for many years. And what we're suggesting is the council will endeavour to produce publicly available minutes of trustee meetings such as this one, and we'll start to produce accounts for Victoria Hall Trust. And I would suggest with members' forbearance that starts in the new financial year, just for ease of financial recording. And then further reports can be brought back to General Purpose Committee as with the delegate responsibility from the Council for Victoria Hall Trust to look at future financial management. There are a number of issues that will need to be clarified as we understand the values of what trusts, the assets that trusts have, what income the trust could have generated over the previous years, what should be done with that, and how future income from the trust should be treated. We're suggesting that should be a further report that comes back to this committee as we go forward. But that's probably enough by way of introduction. Helen, you wanted to make a comment? I was going to pick that up, but do you want me to? I'll raise it. The other point is that there's been an interesting development today in that we have assumed up till now that Victoria Hall Trust is a charitable trust, and you'll notice that the paper is written and the recommendations are focused on feeding back to the Charity Commission and responding to the Charity Commission and ensuring that what we're doing, a lot of the work that we've done over the last few months has been based on treating the trust as a charity and trying to work with the Charitable Commission, making sure that we can get their support for going forward. And you'll remember from the previous comments that looking at the objects of the hall, the trust, we have checked with the Charity Commission, and they responded and commented that on the objects and suggested ways that we can turn the objects into objects that meet with current charitable purposes. I think it was yesterday, although the Council became aware today, that the Charity Commission have actually written back and said that in their view the Victoria Hall Trust is not a charity, although we are asking them to clarify that and to ensure that whatever decision, because that is a major change in the assumptions that have been made, and so we're asking them to clarify that decision and to provide their rationale to the Council so we can clearly understand what impact that has on Victoria Hall Trust. I think one thing that is clear is that whatever happens, the Victoria Hall Trust exists. The issue is whether it is a charitable trust or not, and what are the implications of that going forward. You have in front of you, members, some of the, I think it's on a nice clean white sheet. We've had to amend some of the recommendations I'm sorry, we can share this with members of the public perhaps. Can we share those? So effectively, we'll share them around. So the recommendations that were set out in the paper, we simply adapted them so that one set would be with the Charity Commission determining that the trust is charitable, and one set of recommendations. Has everybody got a copy? Yeah. Yes. Julian, have you got a set?
Yes, I've got a copy.
So the recommendations that go forward, if you compare with the original papers, the first set is, 1.2 is effectively as was the original recommendation, I think. And that assumes that if the Charity Commission determines that the trust is charitable, then we move forward as originally considered. Secondly, section 1.3 of the recommendations, if the Charity Commission decides that the trust is not charitable, then clearly we would have to apply to the Charity Commission to approve the scheme and to the disposal by way of a long-limited Mastcraft. That no longer becomes relevant. And so the recommendations are set out as under section 1.3. So we would note the Charities Commission findings, consider the outcome of the recent consultations, and agree that the Council, as trustee, can dispose of the trust property and also delegate to the Exec Director of Regen and Housing, that's the Executive Director, so which you've got my role to point out there is we're actually differentiating between my role in terms of supporting the discussion with Mastcraft, and the Exec Director of Regen and Housing would be responsible for the General Purposes Committee and the Victoria Hall Trust. And so the second one is that the Exec Director of Regen and Housing, following consultation with the Chair of the General Purposes Committee, representing the members of the Victoria Hall Trust, and the Director of Legal and Democratic Services would finalise the legal agreement with Mastcraft, ensuring that the Council's role as trustee is there to protect the interests of the Trust. So the interests of the Trust are being protected as the decision is taken going forward with Mastcraft. And then again, noting the further report will come back to General Purposes Committee with regard to future financial arrangements, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, so I think that's probably enough from me to last your lifetime, to be honest, Chair. I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much. And now can I ask Ealing Voice to make your comments?
Thank you. Thank you. I've got actually quite a loud voice, so maybe I don't. I need to wave my hands around. If nobody can, if people can't hear me, please let me know. But usually people can. Right, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the chance to.
You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I've written at least that will last for 5 minutes. There were a couple of points that have arisen, which I wanted, actually, if I can just get out of the way before we start, which is outside the piece that I've written, because I think they're quite important, and I wonder if I could just maybe be able to address those. Thank you. The first one, actually, for my clarification, is to understand whether I'm addressing you, Councillor Padder, as the chair of a committee, a council committee, or am I addressing you, because I'm not quite sure, as the chair of the trust? I'm not quite sure who I'm addressing. I just would like clarification.
Sure, it might be helpful if I advise Chair on this. You will be addressing the General Purposes Committee, but the General Purposes Committee is fulfilling the role and function of the trust. It is a role that is legally held by the council, the full council, but they've delegated that function to this committee. So the answer to your question is both.
But
the committee is the trust.
But the idea of the trust is that it is separate and independent from the council, I believe.
No, that's...
So the interests of the trust are the same as the council. That's what I'm not clear about.
Legally, the trust, the council is now the trust. That happened. I forget whether I think it was in the 1930s. I think it was a bit earlier than that it was established.
1901, I think.
1901, yes, and predecessors to Ealing Council took on the function of the trust, and it has legally passed now to Ealing Council.
So that means that
and there are, as with many things, there are inherent conflicts within a number of the council's functions, but it doesn't mean that the council can't still legally do it. But it is the trust.
Right.
So, and that function has been delegated by full council to this committee.
Okay,
So
thank you. Thank you for that.
You're addressing
Thank you.
the trust.
The second question I had was actually the revised or the new list of recommendations, which of course nobody else has seen until this evening, and really it's to understand what the situation will be, because it does seem to change a lot of the basis on which your own presentation was based, there are a number of issues that arise, and I just wonder how that goes forward. And I perhaps leave that as a question rather than a statement. And I did notice in them that there is the suggestion that there would be a separation of authority. Yourself as the representing the interests of the council and the disposal to Mastcraft, and I believe your boss, who would be representing the interests of the trust. I wonder how that relationship works out in practice. Presumably your boss can instruct you how to go about things.
Again, just to intervene, this is something that happens quite a lot as the council, the planning committee delegates to officers who make planning decisions, sometimes in relation to Ealing Council property. This is a well-worn path and something that legally is built into the council's responsibilities. We do it a lot, and we have well-worn paths to do it. Even this evening, I'm here. We have you're gifted with 2 lawyers this evening. I'm here actually to advise the committee as the trust, and my colleague Mrs. Adams is here. She has been the lead officer, the lead legal officer all the way through in relation to the council's functions as landowner. We recognise that there are inherent conflicts, but they happen all the time, and we deal with them, and it's not a problem that there are line management people within the same departments, because that happens all the time, and it's a fact of life. And but we address them, we understand them, but it's not a legal prohibition to us moving forward.
Perhaps when seen from outside, it's not always so clear cut, but that's a comment, but it is as it's seen outside. The third one was actually what you began with, which was the image from Mastcraft, which showed extensions to the where are we here? I'm just trying to think. Out here, which have actually got nothing to do at all with the Victoria Hall Trust, has it? All of that you showed us, that's really part of the Mastcraft proposal, which has got nothing to do with the Victoria Hall at all.
It does include Victoria Hall. That was the reason
well,
I was trying to make
the image does.
Yes, it does.
But the section which you discussed and historic people's comments didn't really do that.
No, I'm just trying to make that clear. I mean, the image is up to try and explain that the proposals coming forward from Mastcraft still include and retain Victoria Hall Trust. There have been a number of consultation responses which have said you shouldn't knock down Victoria Hall, so we are really in response to that. You know, the image, which is again I will repeat, it is a draft image. It's not been through planning approval. It's not been submitted yet for planning application. So it's a draft image. It's really there to try and illustrate that the current thoughts of Mastcraft are assuming that the Victoria Hall Trust will be retained and refurbished. And that's the point we're trying to make. I did try to make it clear that, you know, this is why I wanted to come back to Victoria Hall. The purpose of this committee is to do with Victoria Hall, but that is Victoria Hall is part of the overall complex that's being designed, and that's the sort of line I'm trying to make.
Mr. French, may I just remind you that the presentation was not just for the purposes of the public, it was actually meant for the committee, and this is an overall view, and we needed this information with regard to the presentation, and we asked for it, and we're very grateful today for having put this up, although this is, as he has mentioned, parts of it is confidential and still in negotiations. Secondly, your question about the recommendation, please do understand this is not just this, but the whole report is going to be up for debate and discussion by the committee. This is not something that we are told to do, it is a recommendation. We might well decide that we want to add or not accept or change. So this is something which has yet to be discussed and debated. And as a speaker, please start your comments, and I shall start your time now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Right, thank you. Now, I don't know how much you know about the trust, whether you've seen the trust document or read about its foundation. And if so, you know the founding trustees' great vision was to use funds that were donated by the public to create a place in the centre of Ealing which had a growing population, and they would use it for public gatherings and entertainments that private enterprise didn't provide. And it's been hugely successful. Sorry,
We have a copy.
It's been hugely successful. The Victoria Hall is popular and it's well used, and no private enterprise has ever provided a similar space in Ealing. Now, the Ealing's rapidly growing and increasingly diverse population means that trust objectives remain as valid as they were then as today. And more so, in my view, as new communities are coming into the borough, and places like Victoria Hall are vital for people to gather in and integrate with existing communities. It's a very important integrative function that it serves. And the trust purpose was to ensure that the building operated in the public good. Very importantly, it would be separate from the town board, which was the predecessor of the council. Its income was not to be used to subsidise the town hall, which was built at the same time. And surpluses would be used for charitable purposes and not for private profit. The founding trustees and people who donated their money never thought the buildings would be sold off to a private business for private profit. To be quite clear, if the deal goes through, we will lose these assets permanently. The Mastcraft lease is for 250 years, which is twice as long as the building has already stood. So it's gone. It's not right to say we're not getting rid of it, we are. And in its report, the council tells you that 275 people, was 277, responded to the two consultations. And there's also been a petition with 1,400 signatures begging the council not to dispose of the hall. The strength of feeling really is very strong. You'll see those if you read those papers. And we know that because many people copied us what they said. None of this comes across at all in the officer's report. And the consultation itself was badly flawed, with wholly inadequate information that Ealing Voice has been asking for months through freedom of information requests. Despite our requests, it remains unclear even what assets belong to the trust. You have been asked to approve of their disposal. The report admits some matters completely, and we think it is seriously misrepresent others. Some, I haven't got time for all, but some of them include the following. The report is silent on how the trust or its beneficiaries will be compensated for the loss of its assets. And remember, these assets were paid out of public donations. The report says the reason for the sale is because the town hall is expensive to run. Now, this may be true, but the Victoria Hall earns money now. Its income is used to cross-subsidise the rest of the town hall. The accounts that David discussed suggest the Victoria Hall actually makes a profit. But he then used what I can only see as a fudge to try to dismiss the significance of that. And it's important that no standalone business model for the use of the trust asset, that's the Victoria Hall and the Prince's Room, has ever been proposed. We've never seen what could happen if the trust remained with its assets. The report says money needs to be spent on repairs, with no list of what needs to be done. And other funding is available for capital works and for charitable assets. And they've been found for Pitt's Hanger or Gunnersbury House. And I think for many people, Victoria Hall is a far greater value as a community asset. The report claims that the Victoria Hall has no development value because it is listed, but it ignores the fact that business can make use of the buildings that already exist. As such, these buildings have a value commensurate to the area. We think an approximate figure would be £1,000 per square foot. That's what we think, but we'd be happy to discuss. The report says that... I'm sorry?
15 seconds.
Well, the other thing, overall what I want to say, please let me finish up. He actually had over half an hour to make the case for it. We trying to say why we disagree have a much lesser period.
Your time's up.
Can I please just summarise what I want to say, because I think it is important. I ask you please. Overall, the trust has been mismanaged for many years. Now, it's not the fault of anyone here, but the outcome is that the assets of the trust have become intertwined with the rest of the town hall. No one even picked this up when the town hall was advertised for development. And the council has become conflicted in the way it marketed the trust's asset as part of its deal with Mastcraft. And it has no right to dispose of the Victoria Hall as part of this deal. So with due respect to the councillors, you're not sufficiently independent to determine what's in the interests of the trust as opposed to the council. So we would just like to ask, please, before any further steps are taken, we need to resolve these conflicts through the creation of an independent board of trustees. I want to thank you very much for bearing with me.
Anyone else?
I have one. I'm part of Ealing Voice, but I have one comment which I think will resolve independently though. We've found evidence suggesting that other parts of the site, in addition to the Victoria Hall, Prince's Hall and the toilets, are part of the trust and they were paid for by trust assets. We haven't shared that with the officers yet, apologies for that, but we will do so afterwards. Specifically, it includes the organ loft and what's, I believe, known as the bar, which was created as a smoking room at the sort of northern side. That both of those were paid for by the trust and therefore form part of it. I believe the organ loft is knocked down in order to put that insertion in.
Sorry, Julian, we weren't. Does that significantly alter the 20% figure? I guess
it doesn't alter the figure. It's just in terms of the fact that you're actually knocking those down in order to do the build.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you. So 20% is still roughly about right.
It's about right.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question?
No, this is general purposes speaking in public. It's not public. Can I invite the members to ask any questions or any comments? Mr. French and Mr. Smith, would you please move back to your seats? Councillor Conte.
Okay, thank you. I've got one about the trust itself and a few about the plans going forward. So, just to cover about the trust, an email going around today from, I think, some members of the Ealing Voice about the setup of this trust. No, it's a separate email about when the Ealing board was initially formed and the trust, it represented obviously a different area to what Ealing Council does now, and whether the councillors who are the equivalent of what the trust represents is different to the 69 councillor makeup of the council, and whether that has any effect on potentially who should be making in terms of the decision-making process, and who should be sitting on the committee.
I can answer that very easily, and the answer is no, it doesn't. The powers, responsibilities, duties of the trust itself became initially the Ealing Council, but when Ealing, Acton and Southall councils merged in, I think it was 1965, then Ealing Council, as is now, took on all the functions, responsibilities, duties, etc. of the former 3 constituent councils. So it doesn't, no, it isn't only councillors from what used to be the area of the old Ealing Council. for the same reason that buildings, when we're doing things with them, or parks, whatever, you don't just have to have councillors from those areas. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So my other questions were sort of about the plans. So firstly, obviously you were talking about the ongoing community access to the building over the 250 years of the lease, and the one, I wanted to get an idea of how, in terms of, you've obviously spoken about the cost, but in terms of the amount of access that's going to be allowed. Obviously, it talks about in the report the 10 events a year the council can hold, which is all good and proper. But that doesn't necessarily be what we expect over the course of the 250 years, not just in the first 10 years. And again, obviously, you talk about in terms of the cost, the 60% of commercial rates for at least the first 10 years. So at least, obviously, indicates potentially more. And what discussions with the successful bidder have happened or occurred to look at over the longer term, how they could potentially then increase that over time. Is that going to be linked to inflation? What factors are going to be factored in? And it's very well saying that there'll be a fantastic luxury hotel attached to it, that the community can use the Victoria Hall and use the functions of the luxury hotel. Well, I think by definition, if you're giving the community a reduced rate for their, potentially what the luxury hotel is going to be offering, it's probably way out of their costs of what they can afford anyway. So I don't necessarily think that's necessarily a huge benefit to the community who want to use it for community use.
Just very quick. The point about 10-year lease is that's the current discussion that's going on with them about a 10-year lease. But I think what we suggested that members of this committee might want to ask officers to do is to go back and enforce the position with Mastcraft, the 250-year lease, and reinforcing a position that is protecting the use of the Victoria Hall Trust facilities for the full length of the 250-year period. So that's sort of what we're expecting members to ask us to do. It's still a negotiation. It's still a discussion that's ongoing. The lease hasn't been finalised. We've not got to that stage. We have been explicit to Mastcraft both through the tendering process when it went out to all of the developers to express an interest. It was clear there that the council was looking to protect the community use of the facility. And also, as the tendering briefs have come back from ultimately Mastcraft and the other parties, then we've been negotiating with them to try and do the same thing to protect the community use of the facilities of the hall for members of the community. Okay, it's not finished, and so we're happy to take instruction to try and move forward and protect that. That's fine. So I don't know if that's really answers your question. I mean, the cost is sort of, it's easier to define over a 10-year lease period and to protect it for 10, because that's ultimately, I think, the period of the 10-year lease that we're looking at. What we can do is try and take the direction for the remainder of the period. The cost is, we're looking to protect it. We reckon it'll be a 10% increase because of the refurbishment. But as Lee said, if we were doing it, if it was the council's money, and have to bear in mind that the council does not have the money. As members, you'll be aware of the financial constraints on the council, and going right back to 2013 scrutiny committee when it started discussing about the financial costs of the hall, right through to Cabinet's decision 2014 to go out to tender. The costs and the concerns about the refurbishment costs of the hall have been right at the heart of that. But equally, the council's been keen to safeguard this building to ensure it doesn't get knocked down, ensure it doesn't get lost to the community, and to protect the use of the building by members of the community.
Okay, just one follow-up question, if I may. So in terms of, I just wanted to find out a bit more of the specific, really. So obviously you're in negotiations. Obviously the council must have given an expectation to the bidder in terms of what's the minimum amount of community access that you'd be happy with for the Victoria Hall. So is that how many days a year, how many hours in a month is the minimum in terms of when you open the negotiations of what you would expect?
I can answer
Yeah.
that question. So again, when we wrote the brief, when it went out to market, we were very clear, Councillor Johnson and I, that we were asking any bidder to come back with an offer which was, as a minimum, the current arrangement. So if you look at the days and the hours that the community discount it operates now, that's what we're asking in the future as well.
So that's the minimum that you'd be happy to accept?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Malik.
Oh, hi. Yes, thank you, Chair. I think this report is self-explanatory. I've read it twice, very clearly. And I want to comment on section 4.8. The financial figures speaks for themselves. Victoria Hall and other parts of the town hall, this building, have been losing money every year. It's not right for us to continue to subsidize town hall when we need every penny, every single penny to provide essential services. It's also clear that town hall needs extensive repairs, possibly up to, they will use that up to probably 6 million. My estimation was 4 million.
That's a notion.
That's a notion, yeah.
2.7, I think it was, is the recognised figure, but that's at 2007 prices.
Yeah. Now we know, as I read in the report, we know that we haven't got money. We are struggling to provide services. We can't have more money to repair this building. So what is more important is that voluntary groups who wants to take this responsibility, they wanted to take responsibility as the report stated. Have they got money? Have they got money to look after this building, to maintain this building? Thank you. Just wanted to comment.
May I answer the question? That money, we say that money could be available if it were opened up to look for it. We, as Ealing Voice, we applied to make a bid for the town hall as an asset of community value, and we had 6 months in which to do it, and it was a very uncertain process because it became unclear that the deal had been done with Mastcraft, and we were actually we weren't. But there are funds available through a number of sources, and I would cite the Pitshanger Manor, and I would cite Gunnersbury House as two where very much larger capital amounts have been found in order to modernise and update a building that was not working well. Now what I would say is there's similar funds available. Give us a chance, give us encouragement, and we'll demonstrate that we can find that. But the problem is we need the encouragement to do it. That's what I would like to say.
But further to that point, sorry, Chair. Yes. Yes, you said you want you would be able to raise funds, but you did apply to register as an asset of community value. But sadly, I don't feel any this is possible. All the communities groups went in hibernation. So you had 6 months, you never came back.
Can I come back on that then? Because we were actually told by the Executive Director, or Acting Executive Director of Regeneration and Housing, that we were wasting time, that the deal had already been done, and that they were going to go with Mastcraft in a meeting. So would you, under those circumstances, have continued to spend your own money and your own time to try and put something together?
Perhaps I need to provide some clarification at this point on that. I wasn't privy to that conversation, but I have been in meetings when that has been raised previously where Lucy Taylor had the conversation. We didn't say it was a waste of time. What we made clear at the time was that any bid that came forward would need to be compared with the bids that were already available.
Well, I beg to differ. We were in the meeting, not you.
Sorry.
And that's my understanding. That's what I heard.
So you're saying I'm a liar?
I'm not saying you're a liar. I think my understanding of what Lucy explained to you at the meeting I was at is different from yours.
I wasn't talking about.
And then just remind everybody, this is to be the members of the committee. Let's keep the discussion among ourselves, because we have to debate this and discuss this further.
Yeah, I want a clarification on the structure of the trust. Is the council only trustee of the trust? Has any other organization or any other member of the community ever been trustee, or it's always been just the council?
Just to be clear, the trust was created in 1893, and very quickly, as in once the building was built and up and running, the responsibilities of the trust transferred to the council. In fact, the original trustees were all, I don't know if they called them councillors then, probably all men, and I think they were all men as well. Back in 1893, so the council has been, and its predecessor probably always has been the Borough of Ealing, then the council, the Ealing Council from 1965 has always been the trust, and the trustees are all the members of the council, and full council in December delegated its responsibilities to this committee. I think recognising that full council is not those of us who've had the joy of sitting through as many meetings of full council as I have, it's not the best body to have this sort of in-depth analysis and discussion, and that's precisely why we have this committee and why full council made that delegation. But in answer to your question,
yes,
Ealing Council and predecessor councils has always been the sole trustee for more than 100 years.
thank you.
Thank you. So firstly, David, thank you for this image. It's really cleared a lot of things, because it was a concern as to what was going to happen, how it would look. So although you have made it very clear this might not be the final picture of our town hall, however, we now understand really what it is and how basically it's going to look. So thank you for this image. My concern in a couple of areas, which I would like to talk about. Firstly, what we spoke of, your idea of the recommendation. Can we note that we don't just need to know about the 10-year discount, we would like to also further it on for the length of the lease, and also not just a consultation per se with the council, but with the council being in agreement to any increase that happens. In the rates. Yeah. Okay.
I think it's been picked up down recommendations.
And then one thing that I just wanted to clarify, maybe you might be able to tell us. So once Mastcraft takes this over, will we be releasing powers of the trust to them? Will the trust carry on, or is that the end of the trust? And so what happens after that with the trust?
the trust will continue unless it decides to wind itself up and follows a legal process to do that. But clearly the trust property will be managed and used in a different way, and it will have been leased to Mastcraft in the way being proposed. But the trust would continue. I said that I'm identifying myself with my committee here, that the committee, the trust could, there are mechanisms which might allow it to wind itself, but we're not proposing that.
No.
The likelihood is that every likelihood is it would continue, but with subject to the Mastcraft.
Yes,
the benefits of it as well.
I'm sorry.
And with the benefits of the Mastcraft lease in the sense that obviously as it forms part of the whole of the lease, the income which will be generated will need to be apportioned in favour of the trust.
Right, yes.
So you would continue with a responsibility for how that income would be applied.
Right,
And
yes.
that's what's meant by the delegation. That's what's
Okay, so
then there's a wider intention of that delegation to manage the affairs financially generally, but clearly to the extent that there is any money properly owing to the trust, then that would be money that the committee would make the decisions about how it would be applied.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah.
Recommendation 1.4 is talking about bringing a further report back to the committee
Yes.
with regard to future financial.
Yes.
I think that's both a general.
Because David did clarify that,
that.
we started to put the funds, manage the account separately, and if you want to continue doing that, the Mastcraft is in control, are they going to sort of show us separate accounts for that?
When the report refers to this notional lease that there was between the trust and the council, there was a decision by the then committee to apply the income from that notional lease to the mayor's fund. That's what. So there is a similar. That's the parallel really that I'm to make it clear how it would work.
Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Bearing in mind the financing, trying to put into a historical perspective here, is there any evidence, I don't know, it probably hasn't been looked at, of the previous trust in its lifetime actually donating significant amounts of money over and above to the mayor's fund? I mean, bearing in mind what I'm going at here is, there needs to be financial viability for Victoria Hall and its assets in the longer term, which is what we're trying to achieve as part of the deal. So, is that, given that you mentioned in the presentation or going through the report, it's in the report, that it seemed that the Ealing board, as then was sort of putting the trust on sound financial footing with a £200 annual income, and this was then increased over a number of years. So was that provided the financial viability, and was effectively the previous Ealing board actually subsidising the running of the trust, or vice versa?
Can I respond? I'll reply very quickly. We understand that I think Alan Harrison, we were talking about this before, committee actually, and there are a number of instances where reports back to about 1930 suggest that the hall wasn't actually, Victoria Hall itself wasn't a viable entity in its own right. And I'm hoping desperately that Helen can find the right document. So I think there have been historical concerns about the financial independence of Victoria Hall. Certainly when we understand that when the decision was taken to try and regularise the income, we think there were some concerns that the amount of income, whether that was a financially viable entity of its own at that stage. And I think there are a number of, there are a huge amount of records, and we're trying to go through them. There were some comments that I think related back to about 1936, where there was a comment that said that Victoria Hall Trust had not made a profit in 1942, 43 or something. there are a number of records that suggest it was.
There's a war on.
Yes, I appreciate that. I wasn't there, but you may not believe it from these boyish thoughts, but I'm aware of those issues, and I think even until 1936 there were financial issues as well. So I don't know if you've got anything. Can you got anything to add?
What I would say is, and I will find it before the committee finishes, so almost certainly about 30 seconds after this particular slot finishes. That's usually the way it goes. I was reminding myself of the trials of directors of legal services past. This is file papers 1887 onwards, this file says. And then I found in several places mention of financial difficulties. In fact, even back in 1888, the reason for the call for money from the public is that, and I'm looking at councillors here, same old, back in 1888, there was a funding gap. The council, what then, the Board of Trustees wanted to build its a lovely new town hall, and there was a funding gap, so they put out a call for extra fund. I can't immediately find the wording particularly. When I do find it, I'll let you know. I should have flagged it up this afternoon. But sorry, just one other point I would make is that we do know that up until 1975, the money was taken from the income from the Victoria Hall, and that money was used to support coronation cottages. And I don't quite know where those were. I think they might. I couldn't find a postcode anywhere. I think maybe Hanwell, but I'm not sure. And those cottages were demolished in 1975, and that's when all separate records fell. But up until that time, my understanding was, although income was being paid out, actually there was some subsidy being given by the council.
So what's then, sorry, Chair, if I could just come in, I believe what you actually sort of say is that the income was being paid out by the trustees, it was subsidised by the council. So the income that was going out was actually, a loss in effect for the assets of the trust.
Sorry, my assistant, my glamorous assistant has found something from 1951 or 1931. This is 1950, yes. The rent of £250 per annum has been used by the trustees for the maintenance of 12 cottages, which were erected by the council to commemorate the coronation of King George VI, and lent rent-free to all Ealing residents. Sorry. There has merely been a transfer of £250 per annum from one account to the other. For many years, the accounts of the hall have shown a loss. The average annual deficit on the Victoria Hall account for the years 1948-49 to 1954-55 being £622. So, so that was from the mid-1950s when, there was a loss. However, the trustees obviously still nevertheless felt comfortable making a payment, but they were noting that basically there was a subsidy happening, which has continued. But
Chair, thank you. I wonder if I could ask us at this point of the evening, that is this evening's discussions and report just for noting, or will councillors have a vote at the end of the evening?
Yes, there will be a vote.
Will be a vote on each one of these different... Okay, thank you very much.
Yes. Any other member of the committee? No. Okay, no good. thank you for your comments, members, and for the comments from members of the public. It has been useful to have a wide-ranging debate on this, and I would like to thank officers for updating us on the Victoria Hall Trust and the result of the 2 consultations. I would like to remind members that we are not taking a decision on whether or not the council should dispose of Ealing Town Hall, but that we are acting as trustees for the Victoria Hall Trust and making decisions about the trust and the trust's property. We have heard tonight about the history of Victoria Hall Trust, how it has fallen into inactivity, and that there remains some doubt about the assets of the trust included. Although officers have made useful suggestions about a working definition of the assets in paragraph 3.5, I suggest we trustees agree to that working definition. We have also heard about the concerns of the public, both from the consultations and from the public tonight, but have also been reassured by comments from officers and the report that the interest of the trust will be protected and respected as the proposed lease to Mastcraft to develop Ealing Town Hall goes ahead. I suggest we trustees encourage officers to ensure that the interests of the community are protected throughout the 250-year lease period and ask officers to raise this with Mastcraft in their negotiations. I would also ask that the draft lease agreement with Mastcraft should not be finalized without input from the General Purposes Committee through Chair to ensure that the assets of the trust are properly represented and rewarded in the negotiations. We are also aware that officers intend to apply to the Charity Commission for their support for the changes to the objects and to the proposed disposal of to Mastcraft Limited, and also that there is now some uncertainty as to whether Victoria Hall Trust is a charity or not. Officers have amended the recommendations after taking specialist external legal advice to cover both outcomes, whether the trust is or is not a charity. I suggest that we should also be assured, as trustees of the Victoria Hall Trust, that the trust will continue and the council will start to produce accounts again for the trust, and that further meetings of the GPC will hear more about the financial arrangements for the trust and how the trust income can be used in line with the original purposes of the trust. So, here, the committee knows that the current position with regard to the Victoria Hall Trust, subject to a decision of the Charity Commission that the trust is charitable. We will take votes on each item as we go.
Do you mind if I ask you for the clarity? You're going to go through and do that the trust is charitable and then do all those votes, and then you'll do the bit about if the trust is not charitable and vote all those bits as well?
Yes.
Well done.
Right.
So on 1.2.1.
Yeah, 1.2.
You want us to
consider the outcome of the recent consultations with regard to proposed new object scheme for the trust and the proposed disposal of trust property to Mastcraft by way of a long lease as part of the wider redevelopment of Ealing Town Hall as summarized in Appendix 1. All those in favor? Against? Any abstentions? 1.2.2, agrees that the council as trustee should apply to the charity commission to approve the scheme and to the disposal by way of a loan lease to Mastcraft. All those in favor? Against? Any abstention? 1.2.3 delegates authority to the Executive Director of Regeneration and Housing following a consultation with the Chair and the Director of Legal and Democratic Services to finalize the legal agreement with Mastcraft consistent with the Council's role as trustee insofar as it's necessary to protect the interest of the trust. All those in favor? Against? Any abstention? Now, subject to the Charity Commission's decision that the trust is not charitable, then notes 1.3.1 notes the Charity Commission's findings. All those in favor?
Just a minute.
1.3.2 considers the outcome of the recent consultations with regard to outcome of the consultations with regard to the proposed disposal of trust property to Mastcraft by way of a loan lease as part of the wider redevelopment of Ealing Town Halls as summarized in Appendix 1. All those in favor? Against? Any abstention? 1.3.3 agrees that the council as trustee dispose of the trust property by way of a loan lease to Mastcraft. All those in favor? Against? Any abstention? 1.3.4 delegates authority to Executive Director of Regeneration and Housing following a consultation with the Chair of the General Purposes Committee and the Director of Legal and Democratic Services to finalize the legal agreements and with Mastcraft consistent with the Council's role as trustee insofar as it is necessary to protect the interests of the trust. All those in favor? Against? Any abstention? 1.4.
Yeah, we'll vote for that. We'll vote for that.
That concludes the meeting.
Councillor Talbot, with your permission, could we thank you, since you're deputies again today, thank you for the courteous way that you chaired this committee in the last municipal year, and wish you all the very best for the election. Let's hope we don't see you after it. For the right reasons, of course.
That is nice of you.